Joining us now to review some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Arise News analyst Emmanuel Ifene. Great Malabite.
Good morning, Ruben.
How was church yesterday?
Well, it was a dull weekend. After the celebration from the house of MKO, yes, we had that sad news in the night. But shout out to Chief Mrs. Adebisi MKO Abiola.
Thank you.
Yes. Now let's start the review with this day, Nigeria's newspaper of records. The lead story: Southwest leaders tell region separatist agitators to back off. Advocate federalism, reallocation of resources, endorse Southern governors' ban on open grazing. Yes, that story is also on the front pages of a number of newspapers, including the Daily Sun newspaper. Yoruba APC leaders reject Oduduwa Biafra option. Back open grazing ban, state police, through federalism. Count me out of Yoruba nation agitation, Akeredolu. While the Daily Champion newspaper also has a story. Southwest APC leaders back Southern governors on open grazing ban, oppose secessionist agitation, canvass through federalism, state police. But the absence of some governors is being reported by the New Telegraph newspaper. Akeredolu, Fayemi absent as Southwest APC leaders demand true federalism. Back Southern governors on open grazing ban. Tinubu, Akonde, Oshoba, Gbajabiamila, Sanwo-Olu, others oppose separatist agitation, hate speech. Yes, that meeting yesterday convened by elder statesman, one-time interim chairman of the APC, Chief B.C. Akonde, and leaders, political leaders, the south of APC in the Southwest, coming up with that resolution yesterday. Well, they are only adding their voice to clamor for restructuring of the Nigerian Federation, for powers to be devolved to the federating unit, in this case the states, and of course the ban on open grazing, which the 17 southern governors announced at their Asaba meeting. I hope the loud nature of this clamor across the country will get the right attention. But it must be said, these men are members of the ruling party that promised restructuring, the party that set up a committee headed by El-Rufai to go around the country to reconfirm that indeed Nigerians want restructuring ahead of the 2019 election. So who is missing in action in this matter? Is it the president or the National Assembly, which the APC controls? So they have everything within their capacity to do the needful, except one is not sure whether the president is on board, the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, Ruben Rufai, and Tundu.
Well, quickly, Ifene. First, on the issue of open grazing. Increasingly, we're having voices not just from the south, but also from the north. Because oftentimes people frame the conversation as if it's a north versus south argument, whereas it is not. And you recall that on this program previously, I referred to an essay by Femi Falana ACN, in which he listed instances in which Northern Governors Forum, certain stakeholders from the north are taking positions, including the Miyetti Allah, saying that, look, open grazing is a thing of the past. There should be modernization in terms of how we manage livestock. Now, over the weekend, I read an essay by Tanumu Yakubu, who was formerly a commissioner in Katsina State and who was chief economic advisor to late President Yaradua. And he said when he was, a commissioner in Katsina State, commissioner in charge of agriculture. And one of the things he discovered was that the open grazing of cattle was responsible for damage to the environment and the vegetative cover. And at that time, he had even warned that, look, something must be done about open grazing so that the thing does not extend beyond the north to the southern part of the country. So that's somebody who was in charge at a point and who knew, what the consequences could be. And there have been other voices from the north since this whole argument was resurrected, who are saying that, look, a modern way is preferable. And I'm not surprised that this was one of the positions taken by the APC leaders who met over the weekend. Secondly, the story about the plane crash on Friday.
Let's just look at some newspaper reporting that story.
Okay.
Yes. The Guardian newspaper. Military plane crash, civil mishaps raise safety concerns. Beechcraft King 350 aircraft record second crash in 3 months. Check inclement weather trend. Ojikutu wants. Stakeholders insist on thorough probe, public disclosure of findings, better regulatory oversight. Afenifere calls on military to check its fold. Says 3 crashes in 4 months, inexcusable. Nigerians expressing concern, understandably, says Air Force spokesman. And of course, the Daily Trust newspaper looking at the fallout of the crash, which claimed the life of the chief of army staff. Intense lobby as Buhari shops for new army chief. Some 4 officers were mentioned here as likely candidates, including Major General Danjuma Ali Kefi, Major General Benjamin Ahanotu, Major General Jamil Saham, and Major General Farouk Yahaya. After the 3 days of mourning, of course, a replacement has to be named.
And that's the sad reality of life, because that position has to be taken by somebody else, because we have to advance the fight. Due commiserations again to the families of those that lost their life in this attack. And it's a day of mourning for Nigeria. The flags are being flown at half-mast. But I will say this. As regards that story you read, there have been agitations in some quarters. The argument now is that the person the president is going to pick, and let's not forget the fact that the prerogative of the president to pick whoever he wants as his chief of military, the person the president has to pick, there's some arguments in some quarters that he has to be of the cost 35 of General Atahiru that passed. Because if he picks anybody lower than cost 35, maybe probably cost 36 or thereabout, then they say it's going to distort the equilibrium on the army, and it's because he's still got mates in the army that are of cost 35 that are still there, and they say they're going to lose some vital hands. So that's a story that is developing that I want us to check and look at critically as this jostling go on here and there.
We hope the president is aware of all this in order not to disrupt the ranking within the military. At the time, we need all the trained officers in the service to further this fight against terrorism, insurgency, banditry, and kidnapping across the country. If we just look at Abuja Inquirer, before I move over to the foreign newspapers, Abuja Inquirer, school security, FCTA turns to vigilante, tempers high over murder of Abuja students. FCT police nab 2 for illegal firearms robbery. Well, the FCT, since that revelation that the Boko Haram insurgents are not far away in Niger State, many have been having this sleepless night. Of course, schools need to do more, and some are turning to this vigilante. If we look at the foreign newspapers, now, the Daily Telegraph of UK, cancer crisis risk replacing pandemic. The Daily Telegraph of UK. Experts sound alarm after more than 300,000 missed urgent checks in past year. That's the Daily Telegraph of UK. If we look at other stories in the UK, the Guardian newspaper of UK. just 1.6% of rape cases lead to a charge. Figures revealed. Yes, pressure to overhaul justice system as prosecution drops. Quite an alarming rate, really. Out of 52,210 rape recorded by the police in England and Wales in 2020, only 843 resulted in charge or summons, which is quite a miserly figure. But if we look at the Sun newspaper, yes, the Sun newspaper of UK, wedding bells ringing at Downing Street. Boris to marry Carrie, yes, long-term partner, fiancé of Boris Johnson. Come July 22 next year, there will be that wedding of the Prime Minister and his long-time fiancé. Cards of keep that date has been sent out by the Prime Minister to family members and close friends. So it's a good one for Boris Johnson, taking the relationship one step further. And of course, the Washington Post newspaper, the lead story there, a year later, scares and division, talking about 1 year after George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. The city of Minneapolis prepared to mark the 1 year anniversary after George Floyd's death, the death that sent millions of Americans into the streets to protest. Of course, there were protests elsewhere in the world, but the city at the center of that mass movement continues to struggle with its own reckoning over policing, inequality, and social justice.
I'm completely baffled by how President Biden could not deliver what's been called the George Floyd bill on the anniversary of his death, the first anniversary of his death, as he had hoped to do. You'll recall with the anti-Asian hate bill, that got, bipartisan support and was passed smoothly. There was no issues. But when it's about black people, everybody gets all up in arms, don't they? I find that really disappointing. And I feel like, okay, the House is exonerated because they passed it. The U.S. Senate should be ashamed.
Well, quickly, on the death of the Chief of Army Staff and 10 others, most unfortunate. Hopes aborted, expectations that General Atahiru Ibrahim will be able to make a lot of difference has now been aborted just within 4 months that he took over. And look at the others that died too. Ashani, he was planning his wedding. That won't happen. The other officer, he himself also, he got married 2 months ago.
Olufade.
The other, Olufade, Flight Lieutenant A.A. Olufade, he too died in that. So it's such a tragic event. But even what is more tragic is how the government handled the entire process. It has taken the Nigerian government up to about 3 days after the event to declare that flags should be flown at half-mast, or to say that Air Force officers should take today off from work, more or less, in honor of the dead. Beyond that, I think it's also important to carry out thorough investigation. Why is it that Nigeria Air Force aircraft are always either dropping from the sky or getting involved in one accident or the other? And then 3, I think the president should act swiftly in terms of announcing a replacement in order not to create room for unnecessary lobby and speculations, because I see that some experts in ethnic politics have already started the analysis about which state the next Chief of Army Staff should come from. The emphasis should be on competence and professionalism, and to put in that position somebody who can, further rev up the momentum and make sure that the war against terror is won.
Well, I'm saving my fire on that topic for our next guest.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ifeni, but most importantly, may the efforts and the work of our heroes' past shall never be in vain, the efforts of this great valiant one.